Dear friends, grace to you and peace from God our Creator and from our risen Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. About 13 years ago, I got a call from an old friend, David Stein. He was a college friend that I'd roomed with on Argo 2 at University of California, San Diego. David was one of those guys, you know, when you're in college your first year, you're kind of figuring things out, trying to find your identity and exploring all the stuff you did and believed and whatnot. David was Jewish, and we found ourselves talking a lot about religion. I mean, until all hours of the night. I mean, we'd clear the room. People would come back and say, God, you just still at it again on religion, really? And you let it go? David had talked incessantly about a camp that he had worked at called Camp Ramah in Southern California, in Ojai, kind of near Santa Barbara. And the kids and the antics and the cabins and all this crazy stuff that happened. And I told him once, you know, there was a camp I used to go to when I was a kid. It's called Mount Cross. I love that camp. And I always kind of wanted to work there, but never got around to it. And he said, oh, you have to go work there. Absolutely, you got to apply, you got to do it. And Dave Stein, late one Saturday night on Argo 2 at UC San Diego, talked this guy into applying to be a counselor at Mount Cross. And some of you know, I actually was here as counselor that summer with some kids. I worked there every summer in college at Mount Cross. Dave, interestingly, became a rabbi. He went to rabbinical school. And I went to seminary, of course. It sounds like the beginning of a joke, right? The pastor and the rabbi walk into a university together or something. But he called me when I was serving in Southern California, in Orange County, because his parents lived in Orange County. And he wanted to invite my wife, Neela, and our very young son, Jacob, and we think she may have been pregnant with Lucas at the time, can't remember exactly, to his house for lunch on a Saturday with his family. Oh, great, you know. Made our way to South Orange County. We were a little late. He was worried about that. And I quickly realized when we walked into the patio area they'd set up in the backyard, this wasn't just lunch on a Saturday. It was a Sabbath meal. He had the challah bread out, and the prayer books, and he was just ready to go. It was all decked out. I thought, okay. Stupid Dan. Missed that one again. But so we had this wonderful meal together, and we ate, and we said the prayers, and he explained everything to us, and we talked about, you know, politics and our faith, and I remember him explaining to his kids how I was a religious leader kind of like him. We swam, we played games. As Ellen mentioned, Jews do not cook on the Sabbath. Where is Ellen? Is she? There she is. Because they're not supposed to make fire. So we ate cold salads and leftover food from the day before. And as the family said, observing the Sabbath, and that's the right word, is observing that law, that rule, is what you do is you kind of lump around together. And you just kind of waste time with each other. It's really kind of wonderful if you haven't done it. You know, there's wisdom in this tradition of like taking a break from all our busyness. And it reminds us that we're not really as important as we think. Practice comes from the Bible, really from the story of creation in Genesis, where God creates for 6 days and takes a break on the seventh day. And sees from all the work that God had done in creating, and looks back and sees the entire creation in its entirety, and that was very good. And the rationale is, well, if it's good enough for God, our Creator, it's good enough for us, God's people. We can rest, we can take a break, it's important, it's a rule, it's a commandment, and so forth. I realized how seriously David took this when he told me, Dan, do you think you could leave the light on when you leave the bathroom? Because it's kind of hard to use the bathroom in the dark. And he reminded me, we're not allowed to turn lights on and off. Okay. I think about that experience when I hear about the Sabbath, when I read, for example, the text from our gospel today as a lived experience of Sabbath for a people in this living faith and what it actually means. Jewish faith is defined by observance and adherence to the law. We may tend sometime as Christians to misunderstand or even misrepresent what that means. We talk a lot about law and gospel in the Christian world, especially in the Lutheran church, and we maybe sometimes oppose them and say, the gospel, the good news of grace is good, and the law, not so good. But that's really not true. The law in the Hebrew faith, and as described by the Bible, the Torah, as it's in Hebrew, is a set of rules and a guide for how we live our lives. But in the Jewish faith, and I think we have to say this as Christians is true too, it's an expression of God's goodness. To live according to the law is to flourish like a tree that's planted and taken care of and so forth. So it's not legalistic to follow the law. It's a way of being good as God is good. That story, that explanation may help us understand the conflict that we see in the gospel today. In it, Jesus appears to deliberately break this law and roil these religious leaders in what seems like a somewhat more minor example of plucking grain. And he cites, for those that object, well, remember what King David did. He took the bread of the presence out of the temple, a holy bread that was only for priests, that was not okay, and fed his companions because they needed food. And then when he gets to the synagogue, he engages in an act that's even more offensive. And people are watching, kind of trying to trip him up. As we heard, he heals a man with a withered hand. A couple of things to note in reflecting on this encounter. One is that there are kind of special circumstances to the story. We're getting a reflection, sort of a Christian lens on the story too, because it's written by the evangelist Luke. And it reflects some of the tensions in the early Christian world between Christians and Jews. So that's important to keep in mind. But even from within the story, there are people that are kind of out to get Jesus. That's not like a neutral situation. They're looking to catch him sort of with his hand in the proverbial cookie jar. And based on this, and I think as church people, we kind of have to think about how would we feel if somebody came into our church community and started doing things differently than the way we usually do it, and told us that that's okay. Maybe we'd be a little upset about it or uncomfortable. And Jesus is kind of playing with that a little bit in this story. But he illustrates in this somewhat defiant act what I think is our basic message for today, is that human need and addressing human need and caring for those in need in our midst is more important than blind adherence to a set of rules and a slavish obedience. It doesn't mean that the law doesn't matter or that it's not important or that Jesus is flouting it by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, Jesus never says in the Gospels that the law is bad or that we shouldn't follow it or that it isn't an expression of God's goodness. Remember, he's a Jew and a rabbi and a prophet. He understands what the law and observing the law is about. But he's trying to make a point here about what we read in 2 Corinthians as the spirit of the law, as opposed to the letter of the law. St. Paul makes this distinction between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and that may help us understand what Jesus is about. We may be inclined to think that he's kind of making the point, you have the law, but I'm above the law. I'm more important than the law. And while as Christians we might say, well, that's kind of true, as the second person of the Trinity, Jesus is the giver of the law, the judge of the living and the dead, and so forth. But it's not true that Jesus is breaking the law for the sake of breaking the law. The law is good, but sometimes we miss the point of its purpose. And I think it may be safe to say, if we use a slavish adherence to the law to prevent somebody from helping another person in need, then the law has lost its purpose. If the law expresses God's goodness and grace, and if it wants to promote peace in the world and harmony in relationships with other people and so forth, that's the point of the law. Well, the laws of our country right now are changing. And I've talked to some of you who are not happy about it. Some of you may think it's a good thing that certain laws are changing. We understand law slightly differently in our day and age than the ancients did. As a democracy, we write laws, we are governed by laws, we change laws, and that, as members of a democratic society, that's your responsibility as citizens to consider what laws we have and how they do or don't reflect God's will. One thing that has not changed about the law is the question of how it affects human beings or other creatures or the planet itself, which is God's sacred trust to us as God's stewards. Does the law or given laws promote life, health, and flourishing? That, I think, is a test that the story of Jesus gives, may be relevant for us today. That, I think, is the spirit of the law. The law does this. Or does the law tear down and kill, which is the letter of the law? As St. Paul writes, the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Doesn't mean the law doesn't matter, but it's an understanding of how we interpret the law and how we use the law as God's agents in the world. Last week, some of you may have heard about something disgraceful that happened in our own community. The Islamic Center, the mosque here in town, which is like a worship center for Muslims, was vandalized. A misguided individual broke windows and slashed tires on bikes, and in really an idiotic display of ignorance, draped bacon over the door handle of the mosque to try to humiliate our neighbors and fellow citizens that happen to be Muslim. I just found this embarrassing as a citizen of Davis, and frankly as a faith leader. I kind of felt like I failed somehow, that I could be in this role in this community and something like this could happen. It really was shameful. What was not shameful, however, and what gave me hope, was the gathering that happened on Friday night with faith leaders and citizens and students and all kinds of people from different walks of life that gathered to show an outpouring of love for the Muslim community, to say to them, you are our neighbors and our friends, and we love you. You have a right to be here too, and to worship as you see fit. And we care about that. Even if we don't agree with you on the religious doctrine and theology and so forth, or if we're not religious at all, we recognize that this is just not okay. And that we as a community need to be there for those who are vulnerable or upset or feeling not cared for. That is our role, and that is our calling, I think, also as God's people. I think it's significant that our text ends this morning with Jesus calling disciples and naming them, because that's what we're called to be as God's people also, is Jesus followers. And to learn from Jesus how to be God's people in the world, filled with compassion and love for those in need, even as we uphold the law duly administered in our society. That is our calling, and that is our privilege as Christ's followers and God's people in the world. That is the Spirit that gives life. Amen.